Lily Chen had always believed she knew what her life would be like. Growing up in a traditional family in Seoul, she was the youngest of 3 siblings, always polite, diligent, and obedient. Her parents had dreams for her, dreams she had once shared: become a lawyer, marry someone respectable, live a life of security and social approval. But as she reached her early 20s, a quiet but persistent fire began to grow inside her, a desire to paint, to create, to live a life where her heart mattered more than anyone else's expectations. She had spent nights sketching on tiny sheets of paper, imagining colors blending like music on a canvas, and for the first time, she felt truly alive. That excitement, however, clashed violently with her family's rigid rules. When she announced that she wanted to pursue art instead of law, her parents' faces tightened with disbelief, anger, and disappointment. Words like irresponsible and shame fell sharply, cutting deeper than any physical blow could. By the end of the night, her family had made their decision: Lily was to leave the house immediately. The life she had known, the warmth of a home she thought would always protect her, vanished in the cold light of dawn. With only a small suitcase containing a few clothes, her sketchbooks, and a few sentimental items, Lily stepped onto the bustling streets of Seoul with nothing but uncertainty and a quiet determination. The city, which had always felt alive and familiar, now seemed immense and unforgiving. She wandered for hours, searching for a place to rest, feeling the crushing weight of loneliness. The streets were noisy with traffic, people rushing by with their own purpose, unaware of a young woman carrying both a dream and a heartbreak on her shoulders. Hunger and exhaustion gnawed at her, but Lily refused to give up. She reminded herself that life might have turned upside down, but there was still a spark inside her she could nurture. Desperate for work, Lily began taking odd jobs. She cleaned apartments, polished floors, washed dishes, and did laundry for anyone who would pay her. The work was exhausting and the hours long, but every small tip, every grateful word from a client reminded her that she could survive. Some days, she barely scraped enough together to buy a meal, and some nights, she curled up in a cheap, dimly lit hostel, missing the warmth of home but feeling a flicker of freedom. She learned quickly how to move silently through rich apartments, noticing the tiniest details: a misplaced vase, a smudge on the window, the faint smell of perfume lingering on a cushion. She became careful, observant, and patient, traits that would soon save her in ways she could not yet imagine. It was during one of these long workdays that fate intervened. Lily had been hired to clean a luxurious penthouse in the Gangnam district, a space that gleamed with polished marble floors, oversized windows, and an air of wealth she had never known firsthand. She moved cautiously, wiping surfaces and organizing items, when her foot slipped on the smooth floor. Pain shot through her ankle, and she fell heavily against the wall, stifling a scream. The moment seemed suspended in time, and she felt helpless, unable to move. It was then that she saw him, Jin-woo Park. Jin-woo appeared from the doorway like a guardian in an unexpected story. He was tall, impeccably dressed, with sharp eyes that softened the moment they landed on her. He didn't rush, didn't panic. Instead, he knelt beside her gently, checking her ankle with a careful hand. "Are you hurt badly?" he asked, his voice calm, almost soothing. Lily, embarrassed and wary, nodded, unable to speak at first. He helped her to a nearby sofa, bringing her water and applying a cold compress. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of safety she hadn't realized she craved. In the days that followed, Jinwoo's gestures of kindness continued. He offered her food, helped her ankle heal, and spoke to her with respect, never patronizing her. Unlike anyone she had ever known, he seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts, her dreams, her struggles. They would sit in the quiet living room, talking softly over steaming cups of tea, laughter occasionally escaping despite the weight of the world pressing outside the apartment walls. He asked about her art, encouraged her to sketch whenever she could, and even offered her a small corner in his penthouse where she could work. Lily's heart, fragile and wary, began to feel hope again. She realized that life could still offer moments of kindness, of connection, even when it had stripped her bare. For the first time since being cast out by her family, Lily allowed herself to imagine a life where she wasn't just surviving, but living. She looked forward to mornings when sunlight streamed through Jinwoo's windows, to quiet conversations that lingered long into the evening, and to the small, tender ways he showed he cared. She felt seen for the first time, not for her background, not for what she could provide, but for who she truly was. Hope, fragile but persistent, began to bloom inside her. She could almost forget, in these stolen moments of peace, the fear and rejection that had haunted her. But life, as she would soon learn, rarely allows hope to exist without testing it. While Jinwoo's kindness felt like a miracle, the hints of mystery around him, the sudden visitors, the whispered phone calls, were shadows she could not yet understand. Still, in that moment, as she rested her ankle and sketched quietly on a small notepad he had provided, Lily allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, she had found a place where she could start over. The world felt dangerous and unpredictable, but for the first time since she was thrown out, it also felt full of possibility, full of people who might care, and full of hope that life could be more than survival. It could be beautiful. Lily had begun to settle into the fragile rhythm of her new life, her days filled with small victories and quiet moments of contentment, but the cracks she hadn't noticed began to appear, jagged and threatening. Jinwoo's kindness, which had once felt like a warm, unshakable refuge, started to carry shadows she couldn't ignore. She noticed the subtle shifts, the way his phone would vibrate constantly, the urgent glances he gave the doorway when someone knocked, and the way his jaw tensed when conversations over the phone ended abruptly. These were small things, easy to dismiss if she wanted to cling to the hope she had found, yet they gnawed at the edge of her mind. Lily tried to push away her growing unease, telling herself that everyone had their secrets, that perhaps Jinwoo's world was just complicated, that these things didn't define the man who had shown her so much care. But one evening, the truth hit her like a wave she couldn't escape. She had been asked to carry a bag of groceries into Jinwoo's study while he attended a phone call in the living room, and in the silence of the spacious apartment, she overheard fragments of words, names that chilled her, mentions of debts, collections, and operations, that sounded more like commands in a violent game than business. Her hands froze around the bag as she realized, with a cold, sinking dread, that Jinwoo was not just a man of influence, not just wealthy, but involved in something dangerous, something that existed on the edge of law and morality. Her heart raced, fear and disbelief warring with the affection she felt for him. Could the same man who had tenderly helped her ankle, who had made her laugh when she felt hopeless, who had created a small space for her to feel safe and alive, also be part of a world where violence and crime dictated reality? The idea was unbearable, yet undeniable. That night, when Jinwoo returned to check on her, she could not speak. Her eyes held questions he could not yet answer. Seeing her hesitation, his expression softened, but there was an unspoken weight in the air, a tension that neither could ignore. She demanded the truth, her voice trembling as she tried to balance the love she felt with the terror that had crept into her chest. Jinwoo, after a long pause, told her everything, not with boastful pride, not with casual dismissal, but with a quiet sincerity that pierced her heart. He was part of the Korean Mafia, he admitted, and though he tried to live with rules and boundaries, his life was entangled with power, influence, and danger she could not even begin to comprehend. Lily's hands shook as she absorbed the words, her mind spinning with betrayal, fear, and heartbreak. The apartment, which had once felt like a sanctuary, now seemed like a gilded cage, beautiful but dangerous. She thought of her parents' rejection, of the loneliness she had endured on the streets, and now she felt trapped again, only this time not by abandonment but by love itself. The next few days were unbearable. She tried to convince herself she could navigate this world with Jinwoo, that perhaps their bond was strong enough to withstand the truth, but the shadows of fear were relentless. Every knock at the door, every unfamiliar sound, sent shivers down her spine. She began to pull away, not out of lack of care, but out of self-preservation. Jinwoo, in turn, did everything he could to reassure her, gentle words, careful gestures, reminders that he was still the same man she had come to trust, but she could see the sorrow in his eyes, the regret that she was forced to confront the reality of who he was. Despite his love, Lily realized she could not ignore the danger, and as much as it pained her, she knew she had to leave. She packed a small bag, tears blurring her vision as she walked out of the apartment that had become both a refuge and a reminder of the life she could never fully inhabit. Jin-woo did not stop her, though he silently prayed that she would return, that the bond they had formed would survive even the chasm that the truth had created between them. Alone on the streets again, Lily felt the familiar sting of abandonment, the echo of her family's rejection mingling with the heartbreak of leaving the one person who had truly cared for her. Pain, she realized, was not just in loss but in love that could not exist freely, and as the night wrapped its cold arms around her, she understood that life's beauty often came with a price, and hope, once fragile, could be cruelly tested. She wandered, clutching her bag, haunted by Jinwoo's image, his gentle smile, the way he had believed in her when no one else had. Her heart ached with longing and fear, the city lights blurring into streaks of loneliness as she questioned whether trust and love were luxuries she could ever afford again. And yet, even in that profound despair, a small, stubborn ember of hope remained, hope that perhaps, one day, the truth and love could coexist, that the man who had saved her might not only exist in shadow, but in light as well. After days of wandering the city alone, Lily felt the weight of her decision pressing down on her chest. She had returned to the life of uncertainty she had known before meeting Jin-woo, yet this time, every step she took was haunted by memories of his calm smile, the gentleness in his hands, and the quiet way he had made her feel safe when the world had turned against her. Her apartment, small and dimly lit, felt emptier than ever, and even her art, which had once given her solace, now seemed lifeless under her trembling fingers. She struggled to focus on her sketches, unable to fill the pages with colors that once felt like freedom. Jin-woo, for his part, had retreated to his world of shadows, but not entirely without thought of her. Behind the doors of his powerful life, where loyalty, danger, and fear often dictated every move, he was haunted by Lily's absence. For the first time in his life, he had allowed himself to care so deeply for someone whose world was entirely separate from his own. The realization was painful. He had fallen in love with a girl who did not know the depth of his struggles and whose life could be endangered simply by staying close to him. Then, one evening, as the city's neon lights reflected off rain-slicked streets, Lily was confronted with a sudden threat. She had been taking a shortcut through a narrow alley after work, the bag of her meager earnings clutched tightly against her chest, when two men emerged from the shadows. Their intentions were clear, violent, and immediate. Her heart pounded as she tried to back away, but there was no escape. Just as panic threatened to paralyze her, Jin-woo appeared, seemingly from nowhere, his presence commanding and terrifying. The way he moved was swift, precise, and controlled, a silent announcement that danger was no longer hers to bear alone. He neutralized the threat with a cold efficiency that made her chest tighten in fear, but then, almost immediately, he softened, turning to her with concern and care that contrasted sharply with the violence she had just witnessed. In that moment, Lily saw a truth she hadn't allowed herself to see before. Jinwoo's world was dangerous, yes, but his heart, his intentions, and his feelings for her were genuine. He risked everything to protect her, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Over the following days, she cautiously returned to him, drawn by an invisible thread that neither distance nor fear could sever. They spent long hours talking, walking along quiet streets, and sharing meals in small, unassuming cafes, far from the polished floors of his penthouse. In these moments, Jin-woo allowed her to glimpse the man behind the power, the loneliness behind the authority, and the pain behind the stoic expression he often wore. He confessed, without shame, that his life had been built on fear and respect, that he had learned to hide his emotions to survive, but with her, he could no longer pretend. Lily listened, her heart aching with empathy and longing. She realized that the man who had saved her, who had cared for her with unwavering patience, was not merely a figure of danger but a person capable of vulnerability and love. Slowly, she began to trust him again, not blindly, but with eyes wide open, seeing both his darkness and his light. Their connection deepened, each shared story, each laugh, each small gesture building a bridge over the chasm that fear had created. The revelation was both terrifying and comforting. Love could exist alongside danger, trust could coexist with uncertainty, and the man who had once seemed untouchable could also be deeply human. By the time the first snow of winter dusted the city streets, Lily found herself standing beside Jin-woo once again, feeling safer, not because the world had changed, but because she understood him better, because she knew the depth of his heart and the truth of his intentions. And in that quiet understanding, amidst the soft glow of streetlights and the scent of fresh snow in the air, she allowed herself to hope again, not naive hope, but a mature, cautious hope built on the knowledge that love sometimes requires seeing the full spectrum of a person, including their shadows, and choosing to stay anyway. It was a revelation that reshaped her world, teaching her that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to face it alongside someone you trusted completely, and in that revelation, Lily felt a warmth and clarity she had not known since the night her family had turned her away. After the terrifying events that had brought them together yet threatened to tear them apart, Jin-woo and Lily began to navigate a fragile new reality, one that demanded courage, trust, and a willingness to confront the shadows of the past. Jin-woo, for the first time in his life, felt a responsibility not just to protect Lily in the moment but to transform the world around them so that she could exist safely within it. He began to dismantle parts of his criminal empire quietly and strategically, using his influence to eliminate threats without drawing attention, while secretly channeling resources into legitimate ventures that could sustain both their lives and peace. Each step was careful and deliberate, but the weight of years spent in the darkness of his past made progress slow and painstaking. Meanwhile, Lily, though initially hesitant, found herself returning to her art with a renewed sense of purpose. Her experiences, the pain of rejection, the terror of danger, and the unexpected tenderness of love, poured into her canvases, each brushstroke a declaration of survival, courage, and hope. Jin-woo encouraged her relentlessly, not only giving her space to create but also actively supporting her, helping her find galleries, and introducing her work to people who could help her realize her dreams. Their days became a delicate balance between ordinary moments of intimacy and the extraordinary precautions required by the life Jin-woo still could not entirely escape. They cooked together in the small kitchen of their shared apartment, laughed over clumsy attempts at homemade meals, and held each other through nights of vulnerability, yet outside their door, the world remained a place of unseen dangers and lingering enemies. Through this process, Lily saw a side of Jin-woo that few others ever glimpsed, a man who could command fear and respect in his professional life yet soften completely when it came to those he loved. She realized that redemption was not a sudden transformation but a daily choice to act with integrity, to confront one's own mistakes, and to create a world where love could thrive despite the shadows of the past. In turn, Jin-woo learned from Lily's resilience, her ability to endure rejection and danger without losing her sense of hope or her capacity for empathy. He began to question the structures of power he had relied on for so long, recognizing that influence without morality was empty, and that the life he had built through fear was a life that could never truly contain the love he felt for her. They faced challenges together, old enemies testing boundaries, rival factions threatening the fragile peace Jin-woo had constructed, and moments when the past seemed poised to drag them back into chaos, but each obstacle strengthened their bond. Lily discovered courage she had never known, standing by Jin-woo's side not as a helpless girl but as a partner whose insight and compassion influenced his decisions and reminded him of the humanity he often tried to bury. The turning point came when Jin-woo made the bold decision to sever ties with one of the most dangerous arms of his past operations, taking significant personal and financial risks to ensure Lily's safety and the legitimacy of their future. In that act, Lily witnessed the full measure of his commitment, realizing that redemption was not about erasing the past but about choosing, moment by moment, to act differently, to rebuild, and to protect what mattered most. Slowly, they began to experience life in ways they had never imagined possible together, quiet mornings sipping coffee in sunlit cafes, weekends spent wandering parks where the air smelled of blossoms, evenings sharing small, unpretentious meals while discussing dreams, fears, and hopes for the future. These simple moments, mundane to an outsider, became monumental to them, marking the distance they had traveled from fear to trust, from survival to genuine connection. By embracing their vulnerability, acknowledging their flaws, and confronting danger together rather than in isolation, Lily and Jin-woo cultivated a love that was not naive but resilient, a bond forged in fire and tempered by hope. Through each act of courage, forgiveness, and patience, they both began to understand that redemption was not just Jinwoo's journey but theirs together. It was in these long, shared days of rebuilding that Lily saw Jinwoo not merely as a man who had saved her physically, but as someone who was willing to save himself for the first time as well, motivated by love, empathy, and the desire to protect her happiness above all else. And in turn, Jinwoo saw Lily as more than a fragile girl rescued from hardship. She was a force of light, a reminder that life could be both beautiful and safe if they faced it side by side, proving that even the darkest past could give way to a future filled with hope, trust, and genuine human connection. Years had passed since the nights when Lily had walked alone through the streets, her heart heavy with fear and uncertainty, and since Jinwoo had stepped into her life as both savior and mystery, carrying a world she could barely understand. Now, the city that once felt vast, dangerous, and unwelcoming seemed to hum with quiet warmth whenever they were together, a reflection of the life they had built through resilience, trust, and love. Lily's art, once confined to small sketchbooks and the margins of her life, had blossomed into something extraordinary, her paintings displayed in galleries that celebrated her raw emotion, her ability to capture human vulnerability, and the journey she had endured. Each canvas told a story not only of pain but of hope reclaimed, and of a heart that had learned to love even after being broken. Jinwoo, who had once commanded respect through fear and power, had transformed the empire he had inherited into a legitimate business that thrived not on intimidation, but on strategic insight, integrity, and careful management, allowing him to provide security for Lily without the shadows of his former life encroaching upon their happiness. They had learned together that love was not about perfection, nor about a life free from challenge, but about facing those challenges side by side, hand in hand, with a shared commitment to growth, trust, and compassion. Their relationship, forged in fear and tempered by trials, had grown into a deep companionship marked by laughter, tender gestures, and the quiet reassurance of presence even in moments of silence. They traveled together when they could, finding solace in simple joys, a sunrise over the Han River, a quiet walk through snow-covered parks, a shared meal in a small street-side cafe where nobody knew their past. And in these moments, Lily often marveled at how far they had come, from fear to trust, from chaos to harmony, from heartbreak to unshakable connection. Friends and colleagues who knew them sometimes spoke of their relationship in hushed admiration, unable to reconcile the fierce, dangerous aura Jinwoo had once carried with the warmth, patience, and care that defined him now. Yet for Lily and Jinwoo, it was never about appearances, it was about the quiet moral truths that guided their lives, the recognition that the past could inform but not dictate the present, and the understanding that love could thrive even when it was born from hardship. They had also begun giving back, using their resources to support young artists, provide safe spaces for women who had been abandoned or exploited, and mentor those who had nowhere else to turn, turning the lessons of their own struggle into acts of compassion that rippled outward, touching lives far beyond their own. As they stood side by side in Lily's gallery on the night of her latest exhibition, the room warm with light and filled with people who admired her talent, Lily looked at Jinwoo and saw the reflection of their shared journey, the trust that had been painstakingly built, the courage it had taken to face danger and fear, and the unwavering love that had guided them through every shadowed corner of life. Jinwoo, gazing back at her, saw not only the woman who had transformed from a frightened, homeless girl into a confident, brilliant artist, but also the person who had saved him in ways no one else could, teaching him that vulnerability, kindness, and patience were not weaknesses but the greatest forms of strength. In that moment, surrounded by beauty, warmth, and the celebration of a life hard won, they both understood the moral of their story, that even in a world that could be harsh, unfair, and frightening, hope could survive, hearts could heal, and love could conquer fear, not by erasing the past, but by embracing it, learning from it, and building something enduring together. They were no longer just survivors of circumstance, they were architects of a life filled with purpose, empathy, and shared dreams, a testament to the idea that the human heart, when willing to forgive, endure, and believe, could find light even after the longest darkness. And as the evening faded into quiet night, Lily and Jinwoo walked home hand in hand, their shadows stretching together in the glow of the city lights, a living proof that love, hope, and moral warmth could indeed triumph against all odds, leaving behind a legacy of courage, compassion, and a life beautifully reclaimed.